Hello everyone and welcome to another top tier game from the final round of this year's Tata Steel Masters edition. It's Arjun Erigaisi versus Magnus Carlsen, and by now you already know that Anish won the tournament. It was a spectacular performance by him, but Magnus of course did not know this going into the final round. Going into the final round, it was Nodirbek Abdusattorov who was leading the tournament, or rather leading everyone by either half a point. By that I mean leading Anish by half a point, and leading Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So by a full point. So going into this round, Magnus still had a chance to catch up to Abdusattorov and go into tiebreaks, maybe if Abdusattorov loses to Jordan van Forest like he did in the final round. However, Anish won his game and against Rapport and won the tournament. But you guys requested this one. It's a really wild, crazy game, very complicated one, so you better have plenty of time to digest this one. Let's check it out and see what happened. Arjun with the white pieces opens with knight to f3. He goes for the reti opening. Knight to f6 by Magnus, g3 and b6 now, preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop. We have bishop to g2 and now bishop to b7. We have castles and now pawn to g6 going into the King's Indian attack of the reti. We have pawn to c4 and now bishop to g7, fianchettoing both bishops. d4 and now we have castles by Magnus. We have pawn to d5, grabbing more space in the center, and now knight to a6. So this has all been played before, nothing new here. Knight to c3 and now knight to c5. And interestingly, the position has been reached, and it has been reached by Arjun Erigaisi in one of his games from 2018, a game that he lost. But we're gonna get to that. And here you guys are probably wondering, can one play b4 here? And the answer is no. This is one of the rare positions where it's not okay to play b4, and you might already suspect why, but I'm just going to show you. If b4, you can actually play knight f to e4. Just put pressure on the c3 knight and x-ray that rook on a1. And now if knight captures on a4, you're going to play knight captures on e4, and now after knight to d4, which is white's best reply, you will play knight to c3. Attack the queen here, and after queen to d2, now you're gonna play bishop captures on d4, and white cannot recapture. If white recaptures, knight captures on e2, check picks up the queen, so white has to throw an in-between move, a nice Zwischenzug, a bishop to b2, and okay, white will win the material back, but not all of it. Here knight captures on e2 with check, queen captures on e2, and now bishop captures on b2, queen captures on b2, and if you count the pawns, black is just up a pawn and white has nothing to show for it. So that's why this is one of the very rare positions where b4 is not the best move. If anything, it could be the worst move. So here knight to d4 is played. Just grabbing more space, opening up the light square bishop, and here we have pawn to e5 by Magnus. We have knight back to c2, and now pawn to a5. We have pawn to b3 and d6, and up until this point we've been following the game Arjun already played in 2018 against Evgeny Romanov, the game that he lost in the BL tournament, but in that game Arjun played rook to b1. Here he goes for the immediate pawn to e4, and it is now as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So okay, Magnus goes bishop to c8. He wants to remaneuver the bishop as well. It's not very useful on this diagonal now that the center is closed. We have knight to a3, going for that b5 square, and now knight to e8. Magnus is now ready to execute f5. He has very nice support for the push. Knight 8 to b5, and now bishop to d7. We have rook to b1, and now pawn to f5. So Magnus goes for the breakthrough. We have pawn to f3, and now pawn to f4. Putting more pressure on Arjun's king side. We have pawn to a3, now preparing b4, and pawn to g5. We have pawn to b4, each player pushing on the other sides of the board. Knight to b7, and now pawn to g4, closing the king side somewhat. You can still open it, you can play h5, and that's exactly what Magnus does. So pawn to h5, we have h3, and now rook to f7. King to f2. Arjun now has the brilliant plan of shifting the king all the way to the queen side, where it's going to be safer, and then he can use his rooks and queen to open up the king side and maybe even attack Magnus's king. So bishop to f8. We have rook to g1, and now rook to h7. the rook is now coming to the h file, and maybe the other rook can also join him. Bishop to f1, we have knight to f6, and now king to e1. Arjun continues bringing the king over to the queen side. Queen to c8, and now you are probably already figuring out what Magnus is doing. Rook to b2. We have knight to d8, and now queen to d3. So just improving the pieces. Knight to f7, and now king to d1. Further bringing the king over to the queen side. We have bishop to e7 by Magnus, and now king to c2. And now, okay, the king is now on the queen side. Makes sense to open the queen side. A captures on b4, a captures, and now h captures on g4. We have h captures, and now rook to a1 by Magnus, preparing to bring the other rook over to h2. So rook to b1, countering this. You could try some other moves, but rook to b1 is also very nice. So just attacking the rook on a1, and now rook to h2 with check. And situation on the clock here is Arjun some 35 minutes and Magnus 50 minutes. This is move 31, so 9 more moves have to be played until you reach time control. And again, you could just move the king to b3. It's a nice move. Bishop to e2, you can play that. You can block with rook to g2, and Arjun goes for rook to g2. And now rook captures on g2, bishop captures, and rook captures on b1. So Magnus eliminates the rooks off the board. King captures. And now comes the move that he had in mind, but it was important to eliminate the heavy artillery of the board. Knight captures on g4. And that means that now this will become a passed pawn, and this will become a passed pawn. So a piece for two connected passed pawns is definitely worth it. So f captures, we have bishop captures on g4, and now Arjun really, went deep into think mode, and he found bishop to f3, and he spent some 20 minutes on this move. Now the situation on the clock is 11 minutes for Arjun, and again 50 minutes for Magnus. Move 36, so 4 more moves need to be made for time control to be reached, and Magnus has a lot of work to do here. What do? Do you capture? Do you go back? Do you go back this way? Many things to consider, and I will just show the more interesting one. So let's say bishop to d7, and it seems like a fine move. You are preparing to push g4, g3, g2, g1, and just win the game. The problem is after queen to d1, there's just no good way to do this, because now if you play pawn to g4, there's knight a7. And now look at this, the queen is hanging, and the queen cannot keep an eye on the g4 pawn anymore. So now queen to a6 has to be played. Now you play bishop g4, you attack the bishop here. Queen captures on c4, attacking the knight, but now bishop captures on d7, queen captures on c3, and now knight to c6. And white is just winning here. There's no good way for black to do anything here. For example, bishop to f6, you're gonna play queen to h5, and now bishop to e6 is coming. So queen to b3 with check. You're gonna play king to a1, and after a few more checks, queen to c3, bishop to b2, queen to e1 with check, king a2, even queen captures on e4. Now bishop to e6 goes after the knight. Queen to c4 with check. You're gonna play king to b1. Let's say queen to f1 check, king to c2 or a2, doesn't really matter. Queen to f2 check, king to b3. You're gonna play queen to g3 check, bishop to c3. And now, okay, you can defend the knight, but it doesn't matter. Knight to b8. Very, very strong. And after king to f8, unpinning, knight to d7 with check, king to e7 for example, and now knight captures on f6, queen captures, and bishop to e1 threatens to pick up the queen here. So queen to g7, you're still gonna deliver a nice check here. King to e8, the defended bishop on e6 is just an absolute monster. And now look at this, king c4, king is coming to b5 to c6, and black is without a move. For example, pawn to e4 will be met with king to b5. If you continue pushing pawn to f3, king to c6, and now you cannot push f2, the bishop covers that. You cannot push e3 as queen captures on f3. You can't move the knight, you can't move the queen because the knight hangs. There's no move here for black. You just resign. You can give one check, but after king b7, again, you have to go back to defend the knight. Then just king captures on c7. Everything falls apart. If, let's say, b5, you can just trade everything. Bishop captures, queen captures, captures, captures. You stop the e3 pawn from advancing. You win the b5 pawn and advance your pawn to victory. So not much to be done here. So bishop to d7, although it seems like a no-brainer, would actually be very bad for black. Another thing you could do is capture the bishop. Just bishop captures on f3. But now queen captures on f3 and g4 is met with queen to h1. And now let's say g3, you're going to play queen to h5. And you don't feel very, very comfortable here. For example, queen to f8, king a2, and now g2. You, of course, want to advance that pawn, promote it to a queen. Now knight to e2, and it doesn't seem like you will be promoting any of those pawns anytime soon. The black queen cannot help out with the defense. Not much to be done here. While possible, maybe not the best course of action. So bishop d7, not the greatest. Bishop to f3, okay, but not the best. Bishop to h3 is what Magnus goes for. And okay, we have bishop to h5 now, and here comes pawn to g4. We have knight to e2, bringing the knight to help out with the defense here. Bishop to f1, pinning the knight. We have queen to d1, unpinning, and now bishop to g2. We have bishop to g6, preparing bishop to f5 to go after the g4 pawn, and knight to g5 now. And here, we have knight b to c3. Now it's very interesting. Why not just go for bishop to f5? Bishop to f5 attacks the pawn here. It does seem to be a very nice move. The problem is bishop captures on e4 comes with check, so you don't really care about this bishop here, as white will have to trade and you just lost the pawn. So knight b to c3, adding another defender, now preparing bishop to f5, and only now we have bishop to f3. We have queen to f1, again unpinning. Now bishop to f5 can be played. Magnus would probably shift the queen over to the a file, or maybe even to e8, as that square would open up. Maybe you want to play queen to e8, then queen here, maybe queen here. So while it is possible, Arjun decides to go for queen to f1 first, unpinning, but now king to g7. Attacks the bishop, bishop to f5, and now Magnus goes queen to h8. We have knight captures on f4, and this is what Arjun was planning. Probably if he didn't plan to give the knight back, he would bring the queen over to d3 instead of f1, but it's just very hard to find a move for white. So he figures it's best to give back the piece to grab two pawns. E captures and bishop captures, so restoring material. Bishop to f6 by Magnus, attacking the undefended knight, and queen to c1, defending the knight and also putting pressure on the knight on g5. So knight to f7 and now knight to b5, putting pressure on the c7 pawn. But now Magnus shifts the queen over to a8, and look at how Magnus is just shifting the queen, a8 to h8, h8 to a8. Looks incredible, but I mean, it's the open file. The queen will be deadliest there. And now the problem is, how do you continue with white? If you trade queens, for example, queen to a3, black will very happily trade, captures, for example, knight, bishop e5, try to claim the g3 square, try to advance that pawn, and after bishop to e3, guarding the g1 square, you will now play something like knight h6, attack the bishop, and, well, try to get push that pawn to victory. It's a much better position for black. Whether it would be winning, it all depends on how both of them would play. But okay, here we have pawn to e5. Arjun decides to go for a pawn sacrifice to close this diagonal, so it gives him time to remaneuver his bishop over to c3 and try to counter Magnus's strong dark square bishop, as this is, well, almost a dragon. So d captures on e5 with bishop to d2, and now, okay, now if e4, you're just going to play bishop to c3, but now Magnus goes knight to d6. We have bishop to h6 check first, king to f7, now knight captures on d6 with check, c captures on d6, and now bishop to g5, hoping to get the queen into the game. But now again, look at this. Queen to h8. I mean, Magnus just shifting the queen back and forth. This is absolutely incredible. And now, how do you continue this? The problem is, if you trade, let's say bishop captures, queen captures, or even better, king captures, the bishop is attacked. Once you move the bishop, just bishop to e4 check, and you're getting destroyed here. There's nothing to do. For example, king a1, g3. And now after queen to f1 check, you're going to play not this. This would be terrible. Queen to f7 would win the game, but just king to g6, and now after queen to f7 check, you can even go to g5, and if queen to e7 check, you go to f4, and if queen to f7 check, you go to e3. No more moves for white here. So that obviously doesn't work. So Arjun goes back, bishop to e3, puts pressure on the b6 pawn, and now Magnus goes for pawn to e4, opens up this diagonal once again, and it's very, very hard to find moves for Arjun. He goes for bishop captures on b6, even though it's not the most precise move, but all the moves are losing for him. So now, of course, he wants to start advancing that that soon-to-be passed pawn, but Magnus is completely winning here. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the quickest way to victory while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this another long journey for the queen. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, no, it's not queen to a8, even though it would be very poetic if it was. It's queen to h2. So congratulations to everyone who found this. But other moves were also very, very much winning. But here it's just impossible to defend. The problem is now whatever you play, let's say you play c5, because that's kind of white's only counterplay, you will play bishop to e2. And now bishop to d3, of course, will be game over. So you have to stop this. Let's say bishop captures on e4, but now queen to e5 attacks the bishop and also threatens queen to a1 check. And you cannot defend against both. If, let's say, queen to c6, if pawn to c6, you're just going to deliver a nice queen to a1 check, king to c2, and queen a2 check. The bishop prevents king from going to d1 and d3. You have to block here, and this will just be checkmate. So that's why queen to h2 is unstoppable. So here Arjun tries bishop back to g1. This attacks the black queen. Queen to e2 now. We have pawn to b5 advancing the passed pawn, but now just queen to d3 with check. And it was in this position on move 56 that Arjun Erigaisi resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The problem is you are in check, you have two moves. You can block with queen to c2 or go king to a2. If you go king to a2, it doesn't really matter. Just bishop to d1 and there's no defense against queen to b3 checkmate. If you try queen a3, then this is checkmate. Queen to c2 check, queen b2 and queen captures on b2. And if you don't, after queen to d3 check, you could also play queen to c2, block it like this, but now just queen to a3. And as the king is cut off from the c2 square, this will now be checkmate. There's no good way to... I mean, you could prolong it a little bit, bishop e6 check, king to g7, and now queen to a2, but only for a moment. Queen to b4 with check, king to c2, now queen to c3 with check, king to b1, and now queen to e1 with check, king to c2, and queen to d1 is only one of the many checkmates that are possible. So after queen to d3, Arjun resigns and Magnus gets his well-deserved victory. But even this and even his spectacular play in the second half of the tournament was not enough to bounce back after those two losses to Anish and Nondirek Abdusattorov. He does, in the end, if you didn't see the standings in the previous video, these are the final standings. So he does share second place with Abdusattorov now after an incredible performance, but it is Anish Giri who wins the Tata still, and I mean, that is absolutely incredible. It took him, like, I think last time he won was 11 years ago, and he was always close, but never quite got there. But also one of the things that I mentioned in the previous video, if you haven't watched, that 8.5, it's really been a while since someone won Tata Steel with 8.5. Usually it's like a 9, 9.5, even 10 maybe. But here the competition was so fierce that no player could achieve more than 8.5 that Anish was able to gather. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Magnus, winning with the black pieces like this. First I thought it would be, as there are 3 Indian players in this tournament, and I thought Magnus would get a draw against all 3, which would be incredible for the Indian prodigies. But Magnus does win his Indian encounter, as he drew with Pragnananda, he drew with Gukesh, but he managed to defeat Arjun Erigaisi here. So it will maybe next year, but you know, they are becoming stronger and stronger. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Russell L. Scott, Lasse Maltzer, Friends Bookhold, Ravishing Reptiles YouTube, and Sasha Vidler for contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you have a game that I haven't covered from the Tata Steel Challengers or Masters, do use hashtag suggestion and I will go over it. See you soon.